Hello, welcome. I'm Karen Jenkins Johnson, principal of Jenkins Johnson Gallery in San Francisco and New York. Thank you for joining us. My team and I hope that you're healthy, safe, and well during these very challenging times. We welcome you to our 21st Conversations on Culture, a discussion with artists, curators, and collectors on current art world topics. Today, Cesar Garcia-Alvarez is in conversation with Tiffany Alfonseca, curator and an artist of our upcoming exhibition, De Lo Mio, at Jenkins Johnson Projects in Brooklyn, February 13th through March 27th. Today's conversation is part one of a two-part conversation. Part one is with Tiffany, the curator and artist. Part two is Friday, February 12th, with participating powerhouse women, Uzumaki Sipada, Bianca Nemelk, Jory Minaya, Monica Hernandez, and Veronica Fernandez. Leading up to the exhibition are various events, including Instagram takeovers. Please review our website at jenkinsjohnsongallery.com for these events. Also, the exhibition is accompanied by a catalog with essay by Cesar. The catalog will be available a few days before the exhibition. You can request a catalog at nyc@jenkinsjohnsongallery.com. We have included the email in the chat. There'll be a Q&A at the end of the conversation, so please send us questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Also, please join in the chat during the conversation. I'm honored to introduce Cesar Garcia-Alvarez. He is the founding director and chief curator of the Mistake Room in Los Angeles, an internationally focused nonprofit art space. Prior to founding the Mistake Room, he served as associate director and senior curator at LAX Art. In 2012, Cesar was one of the curators of the first Made in LA biennial organized by the Hammer Museum. And in 2013, he served as the US Commissioner for the 13th Cairo Biennial in Egypt. Currently, he is co-curator of the forthcoming edition of Desert X in 2021, this year. Welcome, Cesar and Tiffany, to Conversations on Culture. Cesar, I hand the mic over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having us, and thank you everyone for joining us. Before we get started, I thought that it would be interesting for those of you new to Tiffany's practice to hear a little bit about the images and work that you're going to be seeing today, and to hear a little bit about how I started to collaborate with Tiffany and how this exhibition came together. So I'd like to start by sharing one of the first works of Tiffany that I saw, and tell you a little bit about the kinds of pictures you're gonna be seeing today. I'll start by telling you that some of us Latinos have a thing for bright colors, and that we like it when they don't match. If you walk into a house like Tiffany's, maybe in the Bronx, a Dominican household, chances are you're gonna see different kinds of curtains covering a window. That the patterned red couch that the neighbor was gonna throw out maybe is now safely rescued in the living room. Maybe now it'll even be shinier because it'll be covered with clear plastic so that we don't ruin it. Behind it, a salon hang of curios and photos in different kinds of frames are gonna floss the biggest wins. Mommy Papi in front of the first house they bought in New York, the quinceañera picture, softball plaques, maybe even a green ribbon because 20 years ago someone got perfect attendance in 5th grade. Everything is celebrated in these spaces because life rarely does us big wins. And across the country, if you get invited to a Mexican household in East LA, things are going to look different, but the vibe's going to be the same. You're going to notice that we devoutly advertise every small business that nurtures us. The pantheon of Catholic saints is going to hang in the dining room via the yearly calendars that were gifted from the ranch market or the liquor store. Our plastic tablecloths are going to be a lush rose-filled garden because they're pretty and they're plastic, so it's going to make it easier for our amas to clean. They're tired often. When it comes to plates and cups, it's going to be a lottery, and safe bet is that you're going to get a white one with either two brown or blue stripes around the top edge. Maybe you'll even get those deep blue metal ones sprinkled with white spots. The cutlery is going to be as diverse as what you're going to eat. And when it's all over, you're going to be sent home with the Tupperware that came from elsewhere. Because here we know that there's always going to be someone who's going to need a meal. If the lives of us Latino families were a picture, they'd be like those two homes, beautifully messy. It would have colors that don't match, textures that make everything extra, and a bunch of things that don't go together but somehow work. And it'd be the most accurate of pictures because it represents our story's deepest truth. That we're people who, despite all that both history and life has thrown at us, always find a way to make it work. About a year ago, a colleague of mine told me that there was a young painter in the Bronx that I needed to know about. And she emailed me that painting that you're looking at right now. And I found that picture I was looking for. Today's conversation is going to be much more about the things that we less see in Tiffany's practice and what has inspired and motivated her to develop this body of work that is advocated to expand narratives of Latinx art and more specifically of Afro Latinx artists. So now we're gonna loop in Tiffany, and I'm gonna ask Tiffany to join in the conversation and please ask your questions as we go along. I wanted to start with that piece, Tiffany, because that painting that you and I sort of talked a lot about, I think speaks very much to the nuances of that are embedded in your paintings. I think for most people, you've seen Tiffany's work in her Instagram, or maybe you've seen one in person in a house or in a group exhibition, and they're incredibly stunning. But I do think that oftentimes some of the more nuanced and complex conversations in your practice get forgotten in the sort of astonishing sort of paintings that you create. And so I want to start with that. I want to start with telling us where your painting vocabulary comes from. And if we can get the slideshow started and get the second slide so that Tiffany can share with us. These are works that probably most folks haven't seen, but I wanted to start here. I want you to tell us how you started to paint, and before you started painting people, you were painting still lifes and objects and developing a color palette. Tell us a little bit about where these objects and these inspirations for your colors that you come from.
Yeah, so hi everyone. Thank you all for joining. Um, this is a really old still life that I did in 2014, and this is when I really started to like dabble into still lives. That's mainly what I used to focus on. I used to focus on a lot of items that were just kind of nostalgic to me in my home and just growing up. So yeah, this is how I started my work. Seeing a lot of things that I grew up around, um, reminiscing on some things, and then I had like kind of difficulty with color at the moment. I didn't know how to really like embrace it, I guess, or really use it well. So that's why I really started off with just black and white. And then we have this still life on the right where you see a lot of bright colors, a little bit of glitter, and that is just like a instant reminder of my childhood. My mom, like she would always decorate the household like that with a lot of blingy kind of decor, glittery and very colorful stuff. So I just always like kind of remember like a cloth like that, very sparkly
Mhm,
as she would have, and that's how she would decorate it to look fancy or whatever.
mhm.
So yeah, that's where I came with that. Still
Where
like,
where do the objects sort of come from? Because I think most people have seen like the portraits, which is sort of what's been more the recent work. But before you started making that, there was all of these sort of trials and attempts. If we can switch over to the next slide, there was these trials in the early work to work with textures and color and imagery, and this is probably work that most people who know about your work haven't seen. But tell me a little bit about why you were sort of experimenting with this and where this imagery comes from, because it's more than just imagery. It ends up becoming a particular kind of painting language that recurs now in the paintings that more folks know.
yeah, for these, for example, again, they're just objects I always saw growing up around the house. And being a Dominican American, I also like to incorporate some things that we learn here as a Dominican living in America.
Mm-hmm.
Like, as for example, like this cup here. Um, People that are New York natives, this is like a coffee cup that they sell in the bodega with the coffee. So to incorporate that with the Café Bustelo and the Domino sugar, it's all going into, you know, the Dominican culture, although it comes from like Spaniard and stuff like that. It's still in our culture, and we love coffee. Like, majority of Dominicans or Latinos love coffee in the morning. You wake up, you have that black coffee straight or sugary. But yeah, so that's always like something that I like to put in my work. Um, Kind of like lived experiences. And then also like on the left side with the plátano, I thought it was kind of humorous. Well, you'll find that in my work a lot of humorous hints. How do you say? Like, I don't know, but it's like pretty humorous. Like, you'll see a plátano, like obviously you've seen that as a banana, a yellow banana that Andy Warhol made, but that's my Dominican spin to it, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
And do these, and so these, if we can move to the next slide, these early works, where you were sort of attempting to almost paint objects before you started doing portraiture?
Yeah.
At what point did you figure out or decide that you had sort of enough of a lexicon of things and that you wanted to use to incorporate into more narrative scenes or other kind of figurative work?
So I feel like in my early work, I didn't really know the direction I wanted to go to. I knew I wanted to represent the Latinx and the Black community, of course, but I didn't know how to do it. I guess it was just me not really thinking outside the box. I'm not sure what it was, but I was just kind of stuck. And I always knew that I wanted to like reference these items and stuff like that. But I didn't want it to be to the point where it's so obvious that like I'm a Latina artist. I didn't want it to be like, oh, she's doing the Bustelo stuff, which, you know, of course is going to come up in my work because that's a part of my culture. And it's always going to be a part of the culture, you know? So, but as I was saying, you know, trying to make the work stand out in a different way instead of just always um, having these items to just identify a Latina artist, you know? That's what I
Yeah.
wanted to stray away from.
How hard is it to navigate that? Because I feel like on the one hand, these, like specifically for like you and our conversations we've had over the past couple of months, there's a very sort of strong relationship with like the kind of quotidian and everyday things in your life, the decor of your mother's household, your relationship with your mother,
Mhm.
and your family members, and sort of the things in the surroundings. But you just sort of made a comment about this tension between not wanting to almost mobilize them in a sort of cliched way. How difficult is that to do? And can you tell us a little bit more about sort of that tension in your practice and why you feel like you don't necessarily want these works to be identifiers for your kind of cultural heritage and identity?
Mhm. Yeah, because it's obvious, like I'm a Latina woman. That's, you know, pretty obvious, and just the way you look at me, you know, you can easily tell I'm Latina or a woman of color. So I didn't want the work to just be about that. I wanted it to be more than just objects and stuff that, you know, we obviously relate to these items, but what else is there to a Latina artist, you know? And I'm finding myself like stuck in this weird place in the art world where I don't really know how to identify anymore. It's so weird. Like, you know, of course, I identify with my Blackness, of course. But then I feel like sometimes there's kind of like an erasure of my culture in the art industry. I don't know. I don't know. What do you think of that, Cesar? Like,
We're
you
gonna talk. You got a little bit ahead of me. We're gonna talk a little bit about that shortly, but maybe let's put a pin on that. We're gonna come back to it. And if we could switch over to the next slide, I want to get us there because I do think that the interesting thing about Tiffany's work is that these recurring sort of symbols like the Cafe Bustelo can or the bananas or the like use of glitter or the kind of foliage in the plants, they've almost become like a painterly language that sort of recurs in your pieces. And for me, it is sort of the more subtle ways in which I identify or see some of these nuances of your Dominican heritage in the work. Because I've heard your work compared to the work of other African American women artists.
Yeah.
And I think that is a very uninformed and
Mhm.
pretty kind of surface level read and understanding of your work. Um, I think that what struck me when I was introduced to it was these sort of nuances that I think are incredibly specific to your particular story and your like family story and cultural background, but that if you know how to read the paintings, that you can sort of catch on and associate where some of these cultural references come from. And so I wanted to sort of start with some of these early works because I think most folks who know your practice or who've seen it see the portraits that are kind of incredibly stunning and that you've sort of been doing. But this sort of early work is the foundation. You develop the palette, the colors that come from the household, the objects that recur when you're representing these subjects. And I think it's
It's
really sort of
yeah.
important to acknowledge that,
Mhm.
right?
And a lot of my work is also like working with what you have, like you see here in the left with the Cafe Bustelo can. I feel like they use that a lot. Like a lot of objects around the house, we would use it for anything. It's just so we
Hmm.
don't get rid of it. And that's a lot that you'll see that apparently in my work, like working with what you have and never getting rid of something, always making sure you hand it down to someone because someone else can use it. Um, yeah, and I feel like that's super like big in the Latin culture. Like we never want anyone to be left behind or like without food or without clothes or without any type of objects. And like in these two, for example, like with the Cafe Bustelo one, you can use
Hmm.
that as an object. But then also these pots here that I depicted on the right, like
Hmm.
easily, I could so see my mom doing this, like making her own pot a DIY type of thing and using
Hmm.
it so she doesn't throw out something else. Like she uses everything, multi-purpose.
Exactly.
Yeah. Hmm.
At some point after you sort of make this early body of work, you start painting people. You start making portraits. And I want to go to the next slide to show some of the early phase of those portraits. Um, these are drawings,
Hmm.
and this is sort of a body of work that sort of I think pivots that shift into making the work that you're sort of most known for, right? So I do think that tell us a little bit about your painting process, your subject selection, and also this relationship to drawing, which I know sort of emerged in 2020 during the pandemic, because I want people to hear a little bit about process and also to understand that the subjects in your paintings are real people. Because I think it's important to make that note because at a lot of time when we're seeing a lot of figurative painting, there's multiple approaches that it's either kind of creating sort of subjects that don't exist or to sort of making up their own sort of image around people, but your subjects are grounded in very specific realities. These are real folks. They're people in your community. They're people that you know. So tell us a little bit about how you select your subjects and what the process looks like from sort of the conceptualization until a finished work.
Okay. So for these works, yeah, I decided to do the quarantine series, which I'm pretty sure like a lot of people are familiar with. So I asked like a group of friends or like family members, even people on Instagram, like to participate in this project. And I basically just asked them like, what are they up to during the pandemic? And these are like the results of what I got. Like everyone did amazing. I don't know. They set up the camera great. Like I told them to just do like the self timer
Mhm.
and like go in a place that they've been in all quarantine. And I think it was a really successful project. And it also was people that I know. Some people, from Instagram, like that were friends via Instagram. But I feel like now that's what it is. This is the generation that we're in. We have a lot of connections online. I think even me and Cesar connected through Instagram. So like I've met
Mhm.
a lot of great connections through Instagram. So it's funny, you get to incorporate that also in your work. But yeah, all of my most recent works, they're all of people that I know, either if they're friends or family. It's always like very personal to me, the people that I put in my work. I haven't really used anybody else that I don't know. I'm open to it. I just, I'm trying to work with what I have right now and keeping the work personal to me. Yeah.
And the most recent work that's going to be shown in this exhibition,
Mhm.
was the process the same? Was it like from individuals that you know, or are there some other more imaginative figures entering into the practice, or what's sort of the recent work like? Because I know there's been a shift recently.
Yeah. Yeah. So the work that's going to be in this show also, it's people that I know. Um and I take photographs of them. So they will just like this is how my process is really when I'm taking photos. They could just be like doing household chores or whatever, is really, really off guard. Um, I'd never wanted to be posed in for this series because I just want to show like what's happening in that environment. I kind of want to put the viewer in the painting itself. So yeah, I'm gonna be making 3 paintings for this show, and they're all photo references of people that I know. I took these photos actually in the Dominican Republic when I went traveling a couple of times last year and early this year. Yeah, I don't know. There's something kind of different about um, like the work that they do over there, and I kind of wanted to show that in this show. So I'm going to be showing a lot of women working in the kitchen, and I feel like
Mhm.
that's a big thing all the time in DR. Like women are constantly working in any type of profession. They'll make a profession out of anything. And I'm gonna you guys will see. I'm not gonna show too much because I want to have a little surprise for you guys. But yeah, that's what the work is about for this show.
If we can go to the next slide. I want to show sort of one of these process so that viewers can sort of see from kind of beginning of conceptualization of a work to a finished painting. Do you always start with this drawing process, Tiffany, or was this just for this quarantine series, or do you often just go straight to canvas on these works?
Yeah, excuse me. This is a new process that I did just for the quarantine series. I typically just go straight to the canvas all the time. This is something really new for me. I decided to like, start my drawings and then do the paintings. And I want to just see like a different, like to see what different skill I can take from that. I never tried it that way. I'm usually very random with my work.
If we can move to the next slide. I wanted to sort of start with those two sort of reference points because I think those two anchoring ideas really shape your approach to your practice. They are about people and very real lived experiences, and they're
Mhm.
also deeply rooted to place. And in your case, they're deeply shaped and inspired by your relationship to your mother country, to the Dominican Republic. And when we started sort of talking about collaborating in various ways, it was, I think, the conversation that really sort of brought us together intensely to sort of have, because I think it's a conversation that I, from a curator's perspective, am trying to sort of understand and work through, because I'm working on a sort of major show of like a Latinx survey, a Latinx art survey,
Yeah.
and you were sort of navigating this conversation as well. But it's this relationship between your experience as a Latina woman and your experience as a Black woman, and thinking about some of the challenges and stories that you've shared with me
Mhm.
about how your work has entered both the market, and just also kind of, I think, our discursive imaginary and some of the challenges that sort of that poses. And I want to go
Mhm.
to the next slide so that we can sort of have a conversation about that. This is a more recent work. This is, I just completed a little while ago. But when we started our conversation, Tiffany, you brought up something really fascinating to me. And it was sort of the reference points that people make when they think about your practice, and that who is collecting your work, who is sort of writing about it, where it's going, where it's being shown.
Yeah.
And you shared with me something that really struck me, that was that the conversation was often centered around kind of placing you in conversation with African American artists, and that you often felt that in that process there was a little bit of an erasure of your Latinidad, and that you didn't necessarily know how to reconcile and sort of approach the reality that there are multiple experiences of Blackness as well, and that yours happens to be also Latinx, and that your relationship happens in Spanish, and that you have these cultural references and family members and friends and acquaintances in the island that maybe don't even speak English, and that sort of was creating this really kind of intense tension in your practice. I know it's a conversation we don't have the answers to yet, but I do think that it's an important conversation to have, because I think it also informs why you decided to organize this exhibition. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience, and a little bit of some of those challenges, and with our audience, that I think is also a very timely conversation that we're having amongst those of us who are invested in conversations around Latinx art?
Mhm. Yeah, we always have conversations like this, but it's true. Like as I was speaking a little bit earlier, I find myself getting like kind of lost or erased in the art world, and I don't know how to get out of that situation. So this is why I decided to do this show, to kind of show the differences and the diversity in Blackness, and not to just erase Latinidad in the in the art world. But I feel like that's what's being shown now. Like when you depict a lot of brown figures, it's an instant connection that it's an African American experience. I think I could be wrong, but it's not. There's a lot of levels and diversity in Blackness. And like Cesar was saying, mine is just the Latinx experience, you know? So yeah, that's, I don't even know what to do most days. It's really, really difficult.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't
How do
know
you try
how.
to how do you try to work that in through your paintings? Because when I was first shown your work, like, I mean, just, and I wanted to sort of have this image up, because your work is just, I think, remarkably sort of, I think, stunts people, and if you ever get to see and experience it in person, how beautiful the work is. But I think sometimes in that sort of urgency to sort of read the work in that way, or to just kind of admire it aesthetically, you lose some of the kind of details that I think you are very intentional with.
Yeah,
Um, can you tell us a little bit about that? Like this portrait, for example, the pattern on the back of the pink, I think for most people just kind of reads like, oh, it's just sort of this like kind of strange abstract floral pattern.
yeah,
But it's also very reminiscent of this particular kind of bed sheet that I think some Latinos household in the early
yeah.
90s to late 2000s saw. But I
Literally,
don't know if that reference is readable to most folks,
yeah,
right? So I think that, like, for me, it was almost like this interesting codes that I started to see in the paintings that I don't necessarily know your audience always catches on to. But
yeah,
can you maybe tell us a little bit about your decisions for those things, right? Like the mismatched curtains on that painting, or
yeah,
the particular things that you said on the table. They're almost like these very subtle hints and gestures that are
yeah,
meant to code a particular experience. But I also think they often get lost or are lesser considered in your work. But can you tell us a little bit about maybe those decisions, those details that you put in the
yeah,
work that hint at this experience?
yeah, yeah, definitely. I'm so sorry for like all this noise in the back. That's my heater. It's like
Mhm.
so crazy. But yeah, so this um you literally hit the head on the what you say, you know what I'm talking
Nail
about.
on the
But
head. Yeah, that thing.
uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
You said it. So basically like this background, anyone can perceive it as just like um an aesthetic thing, or oh, it's really nice to look at. But exactly what Cesar said, this is like a bed sheet that I remember. Like I remember seeing that a lot of the time, like little prints of floral designs, or and they're really like cheap material too. It's just anything, to cover the bed, so you have like a bed sheet there. Yeah, and I'm always like trying to do that in my work, especially like in the more recent work. And then here I have like this golden necklace,
Yeah.
really to depict. Okay, so let me just give you a backstory on this piece. So it's pretty much about two lovers, but they're kind of like undercover on the down low, Dominican men. And I always remember like growing up with a lot of queer men in my life. And they would go through this experience like hiding from their family because it wasn't accepted. So you would typically see a lot of these men looking kind of like thugged out, um, having that gold chain, like the wife beater, jeans and the uptown, you know. So it's always like that's always something I think about. And how can we start the topic about that? And
Mhm.
this is when I came up with this. Uh, yeah,
If we can go to the next slide, because I think, like you mentioned in your recent works, the pattern in the back of this painting, I think when you see this, we immediately rush to this incredibly powerful image of this figure, and then the pattern just sort of almost seems like a second thought. But
yeah,
I remember seeing, I know which sort of shower curtain pattern this is. Like, I know where you used to be able to buy it. I know what it sort of
yeah.
looks like. So I think for me, what's always been remarkable is that these different sort of codes almost go unseen a little bit. And so what I've been more interested in your paintings recently is about the things that are sort of left unseen or unconsidered in the works, rather than sort of the kind of astonishing figures that we immediately turn to. If we can go to the next piece too. This is sort of another earlier kind of work in these situations that sort of operate in this way. Tell me a little bit about, like you said, you made a comment earlier in our conversation that you didn't necessarily know where to place yourself sometimes.
Yeah.
And I know it's something that you sort of navigate through in the paintings. When you are making these works, how much of that is fueling the decisions that you make in terms of the objects that you're including, the
Mhm.
figures that you're including, the color palettes and skin tones you're using, the location cues? Because I think that there's always an interesting relationship to space in your paintings, and sometimes
Mhm.
you're more, I think, generous to us viewers and give us more details of those interiors. And other times, like in this, it's a much more kind of, I think, reduced sort of background. But how
Mhm.
much of that is very intentional when you're making the work that you're saying, I want to include this particular detail for that reason. I want to make sure that the t-shirts that are hanging on the wire are from like these weird like Spanish businesses that are like in places I grew up. How much of that guides your process, um,
Mhm.
when you're making your paintings? Or does it always sort of start with the figures first and then those details play a decorative function?
Oh yeah, it's a little bit of both. Like for this one example, I wanted to really highlight the hair salon and the blowout, and I didn't really I want to focus on all the hair products in the background, or like whatever else is in the salon. I wanted to highlight this moment when we finally reach the chair to get the blowout done. So it really depends on what I'm trying to talk about in the work.
Mm-hmm.
um yeah, like when we look at my other work, sometimes it's like it seems a little bit more crowded. There's a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
detail in it, but that's just what I want to speak about in the moment.
Got it. Can we see the next one? Because I think the next one is, so
Yeah.
this is probably a very recent work. And
Mhm.
um, tell me a little bit about the way that those details play into this. We had a conversation about the use of like laundry and the hand-me-down clothes and random t-shirts in
Mhm.
our Latino households that we never really quite know where they come from.
Yeah.
And this particular series, and the this is the only piece I think we're going to show from the recent one, because we don't want to ruin the surprise for the exhibition.
Yeah.
But I
Mhm.
but I think that this is one of these works where the details are getting much more specific, and also the subjects that you are now starting to paint are much more like family characters and mostly women and women laboring.
Yeah.
Why did you sort of make that shift? Because you've made sort of bodies of work, like there was a body of work where you were sort of exploring these issues of queerness and queer love and the representation of that, but now you're sort of turning back to almost the returning back to the sort of interests you had in the beginning, right? Of looking at the domestic space. Why that
Yeah.
shift now?
Yeah, I totally see the shift. I went from reclining women to now hardworking women. But that's the thing. Like growing up, I've always been around a lot of hardworking women. My mother, my sister, my aunt, everyone in my family, very, very hardworking women. And I just wanted to kind of show that too, um, where that comes from. And what it looks like. And like, and for example, in this one is entitled Milady. She's over here hanging up the clothes because she hand washed her clothes. So now she's going to dry them outside of her house. And that's like something I would typically always see over there in Dominican Republic. A lot of hard work and hard labor, hand working, using your hands for everything.
And recently, you've done quite a few trips to the Dominican Republic. And as you started doing that, the paintings also started to shift a little bit. Your subjects are no longer folks that you live with that are with you in New York.
Mhm.
How much of this new research that you've been doing, um, do you think that that's sort of the direction the work is going? Because no, it's no longer so much about your experience as a Dominican American woman in the Bronx. It's actually like very rooted in reconnecting with your homeland in many ways.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm like easily influenced of what I was seeing when I was there. And I always wanted to depict that, but I also don't want it to just be Dominican women making Dominican art,
Yeah.
but I do want to have a variety of blackness in the art world. So this is why I'm trying to show um these depictions of these women to show
Mhm.
diversity in Caribbean areas and Black areas. Yeah.
Let's go to the next one because that's sort of, I think, a nice segue for you to tell us about this exhibition. You
Mhm.
mentioned that part of this more recent sort of interest was in having an expanded conversation about different kinds of of Black experiences. And there was a moment during this last sort of election and presidential sort of run season where the now president at the time, candidate Biden, made a pretty charged comment in passing in one of these conversations where he gestured to the fact that Latinx communities were much more diverse and separate than Black communities, and it really drew a really intense conversation. And I think that after that moment happened, you and I sort of had this long chat about sort of this and about this particular kind of
Mhm.
lesser known Black experiences that you were um, very intent on trying to figure out how to expand those narratives.
Mhm.
And that's when you sort of also told me about this show and what you were trying to do. So can you tell us a little bit about the origins of this exhibition that is going to open at the gallery, and how this particular interest in diversifying sort of Black narratives translated into an exhibition about work of artists with different kinds of relationships to their Dominican culture?
Yeah. So me choosing the artist list, is this what you're asking me, Cesar? Can you
Mm-hmm.
rephrase it?
Yeah.
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 So sorry.
Or
Yeah.
how did you come to the show? I think, like, what
Yeah.
drove you to finally pick up the phone and tell Karen, okay, I'm ready to do this?
Okay, so I feel like I've always looked for Dominican American artists or like Dominican artists, maybe close to my age. And I feel like it's always a lack of it. There's really like a handful that I could really think of that I always look at.
Hmm.
So I feel like there's been a lack of that. And my goal was always to bring light to Dominican
Hmm.
artists from here, Dominican artists from Dominican Republic,
Hmm.
just varying, different relationships to the island. So that was my goal with this show. And the artists are so different. All of them are so different in each and every single way. And I also didn't want to just typically stick to painting because, I'm a painter. I wanted to show a little bit more diversity with the artists as well. Like, for example, we have like Giori. She does installation, she does video work,
Hmm.
a little bit of everything, So I just wanted to show that type of, you know, diversity within this community of artists.
What would you say is the connecting thread of the exhibition? Because I think that when you sort of told me initially about this, we also had a conversation about how most shows right now are folks trying to create these unifying narratives about what brings sort of people sort of together. But your approach to the show is actually not necessarily that. Like, we had this conversation and you said this isn't a Dominican art show, right?
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what you mean sort of by that when you were telling me that.
Yeah, like okay. Anyone would think it's like, oh, we're just doing Dominican art. This is the Dominican show, but it's much more than that. I wanted to show like everybody's experience and their relationship to the Dominican heritage. Some people are not really that close to it. Some people are super close to it, you know. So I wanted to show that that not, you know, not everything has to be about the relationship. If you don't, your relationship doesn't have to be so close to the island to be a part of the island, you know.
Right. If we can scroll to the next images before we sort of open it up for questions, we're going to show a teaser of some of the work by the other artists in the
By
exhibition.
the way, I'm sorry, Cesar. Look, this is by
Yeah,
Bianca. She's in this show, by the way. Look at her right there.
that's right. And I think the interesting thing to leave our listeners to before we open up for questions, because we want to have a conversation, we have about 10, 15 minutes left, is I think it's at a time when there is this big push both on the commercial realm and on the institutional realm to attempt to create these sort of very clear and digestible narratives about what Latino art is, what these geographic models are, and how they find the similarities. I think when you have approaches like that in exhibitions, you also do a lot of erasing. And I think one
Yeah.
of the things that was very striking over the past, I think, 12 months, particularly when folks were talking about and scratching their heads a little bit about, the Latinx demographic, if you will, right? And how, who voted for whom and how it was split. I think that sort of these kinds of exhibitions that acknowledge these differences and how we can sort of live with one another, and understanding that community doesn't necessarily mean that just because you're from the same country or the same place, you're going to have a shared same perspectives around the world. I think that's sort of one of the big takeaways um, for me from the artists you selected and the work that you selected. And I'm really excited about this exhibition. I don't want to give too much away. There is a catalog that the gallery is producing, and I've written a new piece that is an introduction, I think, to some of these questions that the exhibition will open up. And I encourage you all to join the mailing list at the gallery and stay up to date. But I'd like to open it up for some questions for 10 minutes. If anybody has any questions, please type them on the Q&A or in the chat directly, and the team at the gallery will help get them to us, and Tiffany can respond. So if you have any questions, now is the time to sort of to do that. Let's open up here. Hi, there's one for Tiffany. So I'm waiting to get it and I'll read it so everybody sees it.
Hmm.
There's also a question about the definition of Latinx, and I think that is, if there was one contested and charged question amongst the ones that many of us who work in this field are grappling with, I think that is the biggest one. I wouldn't say there's one definition of it. I think there's many definitions that are being sort of unpacked. It started off as a way to resolve the way we approach gender representation in Spanish, which has masculine sort of feminine connotations to words. Recently, folks started to remove those and use the vowel e to create a gender neutral approach to the way that we sort of use language, and it sort of began as an attempt to do that in English. However, now that there's been sort of a bigger conversation about Latinx becoming almost a way to describe a particular kind of experience for artists of Latino descent who grew up in the United States, or who are sort of grew up outside of their mother countries, outside of those regions, thinking about it cross generationally. I would recommend. There's an incredible book by the author Latinx Morales called Latinx, and if you Google it, it's a good sort of segue into the conversation. But there isn't necessarily sort of a definition the way that many of us, myself included, understand and mobilize that word, which is still sort of being fine tune in the work that scholars and I think artists are doing is that we are using it to describe a particular sort of experience for many of us who no longer live in our mother countries and are shaped by a different set of concerns, and sort of adopt another kind of culture as we sort of move or migrate, but still maintain these sort of relationships, with our families or with our broader cultural heritage. Well, question for Tiffany is, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the pink in your palette. Historically, it takes on so many roles, but I was wondering how that color and that palette is used by you, or why you decided to use it. That's a question for you.
Well, okay. So I use the color pink, not only because it's one of my favorite colors, but it's a symbol to showcase, like, for my mother. She's a
Mhm,
breast cancer survivor, and she's like a very big influence in my work as well. I think that's the main reason for me
mhm,
using that in my work. Always kind of
mhm.
putting her in my work. Yeah.
And another one, Tiffany, I noticed are very light. I notice you, Tiffany, are very light skinned, have blue eyes and green eyes. I'm thinking um, you have an even more diverse cultural background, and I'm wondering if you will sort of include more diversity in the images in your work.
Yeah, about that. So I often get that all the time, but my main focus is not to make art that looks like me. There's so much work that looks like me already, depicting Latinos, and that's pretty harmful because that shouldn't be the only way to determine how a Latina person looks. So I feel like that's why my work looks the way that it does, because I'm trying to show the diversity in the culture. It's not only just we're supposed to look like me or like Caesar, or like it people have to think differently with that.
There was a question about the artist list on the exhibition, and I would encourage you all to visit the gallery's website where you can sort of see images and information about the exhibition and opening dates as well. And you can find all that information related to participating artists if you go to the gallery's website. Um, what are your future plans for shows? Somebody asked. Tiffany, do you want to share the one? The maybe we'll give folks a little sneak peek. If you wanna, I guess I'll take it on. But Tiffany and I are working on her first major institutional exhibition that'll happen at the Mistake Room in Los Angeles in the fall. It'll be the largest presentation of her work to date, include a series of past works and a whole new suite of paintings, and the introduction of work that Tiffany's been doing in textile and in sculpture. So we're very excited. The exhibition will open in late September of 2021 in Los Angeles. And so I know that that's one project you're working on. And if you have any other gallery shows that you want to share.
No, I don't want I don't want to share anything right now. I want to keep it a surprise. I'm sorry.
Okay, fair enough. So that's as much as I'm going to give you today. If there's
That's
any,
it. That's it.
okay.
Oh,
Hey, hi.
okay.
Hi,
Hi.
Karen.
Hi. So Tiffany, we first met back during quarantine before you graduated from the School of Visual Arts, and you were
Yeah.
working on your drawing series, and we started chatting, and we started trying to figure out a way how we could work together, and you were very much wanting to bring to light work of female representational painters from the Dominican Republic. And,
Hmm.
um, you were asking me for guidance on how to do that. And I said, well, who are you thinking of? And then all of a sudden you started DMing me this name, that name. And we both started getting so excited about it. And uh, then Tiffany started contacting the artists that she wanted to participate, and now here we are. So
I
you know,
know.
it's exciting to see, you know, you're so young and curating your first exhibition. I congratulate you, and I encourage, you know, to learn more about Latinx. We have to bring it to the table and have these discussions, because there's erasure going on. There's a tendency for people to group all people of color in one basket. And until we start uh, 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 educating people about these differences, they're not going to know, because this is not part of the culture of America.
Mm,
At least I haven't
yeah.
seen it during my decades I've been on this earth. I would like you to also encourage your friends that are also interested in curating and writing to expand that, because it's an invisibility that's there in the art world, and the curators don't know about it. There's discussions that I know of curators uh, um, acquiring artwork at different museums, and then they don't have the category set up in those institutions where they could place that acquisition, because the structure is so rigid that they can't bring in certain things. So uh, thank you, and continue doing what you're doing. And we're very, very excited about the upcoming exhibition. And
Mm,
part two to this, as we were saying, will be on February 12th, where, you know, the Dynamo powerhouse young ladies are coming in. And one of the things about planning this exhibition that I found very interesting was the energy of these young women is just
yeah.
so prevalent there, and it's so obvious, and they're so excited about what they're using, what they're doing, and even the colors are just, I chose these pink flowers, and I chose this yellow to wear in honor of the colors that you use in your palette. And you know, it's there, it's part of heritage, it's part of my heritage as well. And
Yeah.
continue doing that. And people buy these bright colors, buy them, don't always go for these subtle monochrome stuff. Buy the bright,
Absolutely.
it makes you smile.
Oh, thanks, Karen. No,
Mhm.
yeah, it's been a long time coming for this show. We had to get it done.
Yes, it's beautiful work to live with, as Sheila Mitchell writes
Oh,
in the
thank
chat.
you.
So, Cesar, can you tell us a little bit more about what Tiffany will be doing in the fall, please? Because it's a
I,
huge takeover, it sounds like it.
it is, but I've just been told that I can't share so much. I can
Okay,
tell you, I can tell. Yeah. You know, please go to our website or keep in touch with Tiffany's Instagram, and she'll share as as she starts developing the work and the rollout, so she can have her big surprise.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm
And
trying to
so,
surprise y'all.
yeah,
That's
it's
yeah.
great. LA has will be fantastic for that. But what I want to talk about is this upcoming exhibition on that opens February 13th. Like Cesar was saying, you did make this shift. There is a shift from the quarantine series where you did do the drawings, that people would send you the drawings,
Mhm.
to the more women working with their hands, as you were saying, more domestication, um, from the Dominican Republic.
Yeah.
Um, what would you say to a collector who, you know, is looking more for the quarantine series, and it's like, what would you say about this shift? Because, you know, people get stuck and they want to see certain things. What would you say about the importance of what your practice is doing now as you move the shift to somebody that that's here in this audience, as to why that shift occurred and why you're continuing forward with that?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like at the time when people kind of find out about my work, I was still developing myself as an artist and the techniques that I wanted to do. So I feel like I'm still doing that even now. So it's just getting a little bit more advanced, I guess. I'm not really sure how to phrase that, but um I don't know. My work, I feel like it's always a surprise, a mystery. Something new is going to happen because I like to experiment a lot. And I don't like to stick to the same old thing all the time, you know? So yeah, I don't know.
I think that's the answer right there. And I think as a young artist, there's going to be shifts and you're going to continue to shift and push
Yeah.
yourself. I mean, you just got
It's
out
about
of,
growing as artists as well, you know, just growing, um, talking about other things instead of keep, you know, staying with the same exact topic all the time.
exactly. So,
Mhm.
I want to thank Cesar. Cesar has, this
Thank
is,
you.
Cesar is doing 3 Zoom or 4. Is it 4 today?
Yeah, back to back. So I,
Back. So I want to thank you so much for
my
agreeing
pleasure.
to this. And Tiffany, do you guys have any last comments before we sign off for today?
No,
Mm,
I just want to encourage folks watching to please, if you can see the exhibition safely, or I'm sure that the gal, please learn more about the artists in this exhibition. Tiffany's organized an incredible show, and I'm really excited to have folks get acquainted with the work that she's doing curatorially. Interestingly enough.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm super excited about it as well. I hope everyone can get to see it. If not, hopefully virtual, but everyone has to like witness this show.
All right. Well, thank you all very much
Thank
and
you, everybody.
full day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
one.
Thanks.
Bye.